thank you. Come on, take a seat. For joining us for our Winter Icebreaker series. This is our first in the series. My name is Jennifer McKay. I am the Policy Director here at the Mitt Watershed Council. With me is Kingsley. He's my policy assistant here today. We have a great program for you today. Our guest today is Scott Kendzierski. He is the Director of Environmental Health Services and Director of Emergency Preparedness. Yes?
Not quite.
Not quite.
No.
Okay.
But thank you.
You're welcome. At the Health Department of Northwest Michigan. And Scott's been a health professional for over 25 years. His expertise and knowledge is quite impressive. The Watershed Council and the Health Department have done a number of collaborative projects together over the years. One that is relevant to the topic that's going to be discussed today is the Septic Question Project, which our Watershed Policy Director, Granetta Tomasi, who's up in the front, and Scott particularly worked on, and I'm sure it'll be brought up today. It's on our website. Was to examine septic system policies in the individual 4 counties that the Watershed Council serves, which is Emmett, Charlevoix, Sheboygan, and Antrim, and identify any problems and examine potential solutions to those problems. So it's just one of the many collaborations that we've done together. Just the other day on the phone with Scott, he told me he had to get off the phone, so otherwise he'd be a Watershed Council employee by the end of the phone call. So he's truly an asset and a resource that benefits the Watershed Council and Northern Michigan. So thank you for joining us today. If you didn't know, we have 2 other Icebreaker series coming up. The next one is February 27th on green infrastructure, and the one after that is March 26th on the growing threat of PFAS in our water, where we'll talk about the results of some PFAS monitoring the Watershed Council did in our surface waters. There are cards up at the front desk, so you can grab one on your way out, or you can sign up.
Yeah, I'll be at the front desk. I'm Natalie, for those of you who haven't met me. And you probably called and talked to me on the phone. And I'm happy to register you for the other ones in the series. Because as you can see, the room is not super large and we've had a big turnout. So, yeah.
So, great. And with that, please help me welcome Scott Kendzierski.
Thank you.
And get out of your way.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm always amazed at how many people are really this interested in septic systems, because it's something that I love to talk about, and not really great dinner conversation, but I started my public health career down in Branch Hillsdale, St. Joe. Right out of school, I worked down there in some groundwater projects. Later in my career, I moved to mid-Michigan, and about 20 years ago, I came up to northern Michigan. So my whole career is working in district health departments. There are health departments that cover a single county, but our health department covers northwest Michigan, so Antrim, Charlevoix, Emmett, and Otsego counties. And I'm here to talk about septic systems. So I'm assuming most of you are here because you know something about septic systems, or are interested in septic systems, or maybe are concerned about maintaining septic systems, and there's a lot of emerging issues right now in our area. So kind of start with the basics. What is a septic system? So it's really a wastewater system that's designed to handle human solid liquid waste in a way that prevents any kind of public health hazard or threats to the environment. And when we talk about environment, typically we're talking about groundwater or surface water impacts. Septic systems are used when public or community wastewater systems are not available. My whole career has been working in rural communities. City of Petoskey has a large municipal system. Once you get out of town, everything is on septic systems. So in 2005, we conducted a feasibility study to look at passing some septic regulations, and looked at really at our communities using census data to look at how many individual homes were on septic systems and how many were on municipal systems. And at that time, we had about 100,000 that we estimated septic systems in our region. So we really wanted to look at how can we improve the things we're doing through codes. You know, are there any kind of management or maintenance programs that we could enter into in conjunction with the public to assure that the systems that we have out there are functioning properly and not creating public health issues. Septic systems are effective and necessary, and they are a vital component of the household and need to be maintained, just like any other infrastructure in your house. Your heater needs to be maintained, your well, your roof needs to be replaced occasionally. So, you know, people, and I'm guilty of this too, often think that, you know, flush the toilet, everything's fine. I had an issue this spring that I'll talk about, or last spring. So brief history, first septic tank was designed in 1860 in France.
Wow.
So this is kind of the timeline, and it's very brief. It doesn't, you know, include all the different, you know, environmental regulations that happened throughout history. But so in 1860 was the first septic tank. If I had a pointer, I'd point to that picture. Went into a cesspool as its, you know, final disposal. In 1881, they recognized the ability of a septic tank to separate the solid and the liquid waste and to deal with the liquid waste. So in 1881, John Morris was granted a patent for his septic tank. In 1883, we started to see septic systems appear in the United States. They were very simple systems, and quite honestly, over time, conventional systems haven't changed a whole lot. You had basically a septic tank and a means of disposal through a soil dispersal system. In the 1940s, they became cheaper and more prevalent after World War II. And in the 60s, some of the older systems began failing, and the construction of new wastewater treatment plants could not keep up with the demand. So in the 70s is really when regulations started to occur to really look at, you know, how septic systems are sized, how they're designed, what site criteria we need, and permitting that governed the installation and approval of those systems. In the 80s and 90s, we started to see stronger regulations in wastewater, either in local units of government, either cities or in local codes. Could be township code, could be other types of codes, and increased performance so that these systems can be used at more marginal sites. And in the 90s to today, we started to allow for more sophisticated systems to be permitted through typically sanitary codes. And in the last 10 years, I've seen this shift, really looking at wastewater disposal to treatment, and now we're looking at maintenance issues. So why do we care? Human health and the environment can be threatened by the pollution coming out of our wastewater systems. So wastewater has been identified to have over 100 different pathogens in the form of viruses and bacteria and parasites. They can result in acute gastrointestinal illness, diarrhea, a variety of infectious diseases, and even death. So those are the human impacts, but the environmental impacts really are more related to water quality. So looking at nitrogen and phosphorus loading of our groundwaters and surface waters, which have a direct impact on water ecology. So septic system functions. They're designed to treat domestic waste and discharge effluent through what we call a sewage treatment and disposal system. As I said, there's been an evolution. It used to be, if it doesn't come up to the ground, it's working. And what we found over time with some of those older systems is that they were polluting for years. So now we're looking at, you know, proper design and construction to actually get at the treatment portion of that. So treatment occurs through a combination of physical, biological, and chemical processes. And we need to be conscious of that when we look at the design, not only with respect to the soil conditions that they're interacting with, but the uses. And our uses have changed over time. So, especially when it comes to things like looking at people on chemotherapy, they're using strong antibiotics. What does that do to a system? Some of the chemicals we use in our homes. Even the fabrics of our clothes. Used to be all cotton, now we have a lot more synthetic fabrics. Those all have impacts on our systems. So the primary objective is to separate solids, liquids, and then fats, oils, and greases, and remove harmful fecal contamination. And I talked about the pathogens and nutrients. So a message here is decentralized systems are not going away. We're going to have septic systems. We need them. They're necessary. They're effective if they're designed and operated properly. But they do require oversight and maintenance. So some of the basics, a septic tank. As I said, we're looking at separating solids from liquid waste. So primary function of a septic tank is really to separate those through a process of retention time where the solids will settle to the bottom of the tank. Fats, oils, and greases and scum will float. And then we want to take that wastewater effluent from what we call the clear zone, and that's what gets disposed of. The tank gets pumped, but we don't want solids and scum and sludge going out into the field because that just effectively seals off the drain field, and then we have some public health issues. So the way that happens is comes in through the inlet. Over time, based on the length and depth of the tank, solids settle, and then at the outlet we have what we call a sanitary tee or a baffle. And what that does is it just prevents the scum from going out, and it removes the liquid effluent from the clear zone. So drain fields, this is a typical example. You've got your home, you've got your septic tank, this is a distribution box, and then we've got a network of piping, usually perforated pipe in a gravel bed. And what that does is it allows some storage capacity for the effluent coming out of the house. And the objective here is to have uniform distribution over the whole area of the drain field, so that as the effluent percolates down, it's in an aerobic environment, so we try to isolate it from groundwater or separate it from groundwater with enough distance to filter out some of the biological concerns. There's a lot of chemistry that goes on depending on the soil type and its makeup. And we're really looking at aerobic treatment and pathogen removal before it interacts with the environment that we're concerned about. Anything else I can talk about? So if you think about wastewater going through perforated pipe, as it enters the first part of the drain field, that liquid effluent is going to find the first holes it reaches, and there's an argument to be made that really at the beginning of the system after it's installed maybe isn't doing the best job. But there's a biomat that is created over time. So if you look up the right hand corner, it's typical like a trench diagram. So you have your gravel and your pipe, you have a 4-foot zone of treatment before it interacts with typically groundwater or high groundwater. But over time, the anaerobic bacteria, so a septic tank is an anaerobic environment, so it's a lack of oxygen. A majority of the treatment happens in aerobic conditions. So the anaerobic bacteria comes with the septic effluent, gets discharged through the network of piping and gravel, and it starts to accumulate at the bottom of that gravel bed. And over time, this is what you see happen to a drain field. Well, as that develops, if I can go back, that starts to happen at this end of the drain field. But over time, that biomat will develop along these lines. And as that happens, the effluent comes through and it spreads out and it can't go through that biomat easily, so it keeps moving forward. Well, once the whole bed has a biomat, now you have a condition where you have equal uniform distribution over the side, the area of that drain field, and that is where we probably get our best treatment. So, I love this slide. This is actually my wife's uncle's property over on the other side of the state, not our district. It's a hunting shack. It's a repurposed outhouse, but that's not a mound system. So we have different types of systems. Conventional system, installed at or below grade. Primary treatment happens in the septic tank. That's that settling that occurs. And secondary treatment happens out in the soil absorption system. Now keep in mind, the idea is to have a uniform distribution over the entire square foot of that drain field. And as I said before, initially that effluent is coming into the drain field and it's not dispersing through the entire field. I'm very proud of our code. We have a very conservative code. So we have a 4-foot separation requirement, which kind of has a buffer for that condition until that system really starts to function over time. I've worked in districts where we've had 2 feet to water table. I've worked in districts where they've allowed, because of certain treatment, for it to go down to 1 foot. And to me, that's not protective of public health, because anything can occur in that system that would interrupt the normal treatment process. You could have additional flows, and now you've got untreated wastewater directly interacting with groundwater. So this is the type of system most people think about. So it's a tank and a drain field. And these progress through worse conditions. So as the groundwater, we had a conventional system where we had 6 feet to groundwater, we'd be permitting a conventional system. If we had groundwater at 2 feet, we'd be building up to get that separation, and we'd have a mound. And the mound gets a little more complicated because you have pump chambers and other things involved. But essentially, they're installed on fill material above grade. The primary treatment happens in the septic tank, and secondary happens out in the mound. But unlike the 4-inch tile that takes time to develop, in our district and a lot of districts, we use the low pressure distribution system. And what that is, it's a network of small piping. And when pressure is applied and the effluent fills those pipes, it's distributing over the entire drain field at one time. So you have a wetting front and a drying front that occurs as the pump kicks on and then waits for the tank to fill up and then kicks on again. So you get really enhanced aerobic treatment of that effluent. Advanced treatment systems are very similar. If you think of a mound that I just described, and put in between the septic tank and the drain field, I'll call it a black box, but you have some sort of a treatment system that pre-treats that effluent to a very high degree, and then it's dispersed through that low pressure distribution system. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So our code requires 6 feet of permeable soil with no water table, 2 feet of permeable soil with no water table down to at least 2 feet. In advanced treatment systems, we can have groundwater within 1 foot. We still have 4 foot of separation for all those different types of system, but you can see we're going from conventional treatment to low pressure distribution to advanced treatment and low pressure distribution. So it's kind of an incremental design regime. Some sites are non-conforming, and the best alternative is an off-site system, and those come with their own complications. But that's where you have, say, a lake lot, you have a piece of property that doesn't meet our code due to groundwater, surface water, could be space, could be a lot of reasons. But maybe across the road it goes up a hill into a nice sandy area, and either that's owned by the same person or it's owned by somebody else where they can get an easement for their wastewater disposal. So we'll put a tank, a pump under the road, go up to a suitable location. So I talked about advanced treatment. So there's a variety of different innovative types of wastewater system components that we deal with, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just what fit on the slide. Low pressure distribution, I just talked about that. Aerobic systems, as I said, most of the treatment happens aerobically, so you want that wastewater in aerobic conditions where the aerobic bacteria can really digest that waste. And a lot of it, like in the right side there's an example. It's fine bubble diffusion post-septic tank. So you're inoculating that waste stream with a high level of dissolved oxygen. Even though you're going to an aerobic environment, now you're providing additional oxygen to help those aerobic bacteria thrive in that condition. So that can be suspended, facultative bacteria. I've seen different versions. Some of them have things in the treatment system that have baffles that bacteria can grow on, actually in the tank, so the bacteria grow even before it gets out into the field. All those things have a significant benefit in the wastewater strength. Aerobic bacterial generators, we have a representative of Sledgehammer sitting in the back of the room. Those are similar to the aerobic systems, except that they may inoculate the tank with a prescribed bacteria that is specifically designed to digest wastewater. That takes some ongoing interventions by that company to provide that bacteria on a regular basis, on an annual basis, but they're very effective. Sand filters, you can kind of think of a lined mound, so a box with prescribed levels of sand. You have a uniform distribution system through low pressure. On top of it, the effluent filters through, it's recycled back a prescribed number of times, and then it goes out to final disposal. So you're doing that treatment, you're kind of simulating an environment that we'd like to see in nature for most systems.
Does that pump?
It does,
okay.
Yep. So you're pumping the effluent over, it's recycling back to the pump chamber,
Yeah.
usually 3-4 times. So you're getting a good time dose, so that it has wetting and drying, and then it goes out to final disposal. Packed filters, it can be peat filters or foam media. If you picture a plastic tank filled with foam squares that the effluent is distributed over, those foam squares become an environment that bacteria will thrive in. As the wastewater filters through it, there's a lot of surface area for treatment. And then that goes to final disposal. Chamber systems, trying to think, infiltrator, kind of like a half dome. That wastewater comes into one end, and the concept is that there's a highly oxygenated environment because there's no soil, it's just an open dome. And that can treat as well as a conventional system. Drip irrigation, I know Dan Sledgehammer uses drip a lot. That's exactly what you think of drip irrigation. It's a small diameter tube with emitters every 2 feet. They microdose, which is a term even beyond low pressure. They're emitting a very small amount of effluent to the soil. They're usually within 6 inches of topsoil. They can be hand dug in. I really like drip irrigation for a lot of reasons. We deal, especially in our area around the lakes, with some very severe slopes that we can't install any of these other systems on. But drip irrigation can weave back and forth up and down these slopes and still treat wastewater very effectively. So we look at treatment. Up at the top here is talking about the main indicators that we look at as far as bacteria. So we have coliform and fecal bacteria. We're starting with some pretty large numbers in our waste stream, and within 2 feet of unsaturated soil, the bacteria load typically is non-detect. So a lot of that happens through filtering, just from the soil media itself, but it's very effective at really taking care of and knocking out our bacteria load. When we get down here, these are the things that we look at as far as waste strength. The first column has typical septic tank effluent, milligrams per liter. And these are the things, and I'll get to operation permits, that we require. If you're going to be in a sensitive environment and have an advanced treatment system, there needs to be some assurance that it's working. So we require annual analytical samples submitted to the health department that we review to make sure that the treated effluent is working within a prescribed parameter that we've established under our code. So I took a couple of years worth of data and just looked at, and these are all different types of systems that we permit. But if you look at biological oxygen demand, and biological oxygen demand is the amount of dissolved oxygen that the bacteria need to digest organic matter. So a higher number is bad. So we had, upwards of 250 milligrams per liter. That's a septic tank. Then you have your black box, whatever it is, as your advanced treatment unit. We were seeing removal percentages of 96 to 98%, which is pretty incredible. Better than I thought, actually. Total suspended solids, we were pushing 300, knocked it down to just about 10, so we're getting 93 to 97% removal of suspended solids. And you really don't want, as I described earlier, solids going out into the field, because they'll plug the soil media and fail that septic system. Total marine organic nitrogen, we worry about nitrogen. It's a limiting nutrient for lakes and streams. It's also can be converted to nitrates, which can be a drinking water issue. If anybody's heard of blue baby disease, that's from too many nitrates, so we're very concerned about nitrogen. Not as great a reduction, you know, we're looking at 53 to 83% reduction. You know, the average coming out of an advanced treatment system is 12. The drinking water standard is 10. But there's still a fair amount of treatment that happens out in the final disposal field. So that's all about septic systems. So how are they regulated? So we have 45 health departments in the state of Michigan. Every health department has what they call a sanitary code. And there are a lot of regional differences. If you go to the UP, they have their own issues. If you go down to southern Michigan, they have their own issues. Our soils are variable, but we have some very restrictive soils that prevent the transmissivity is low, so wastewater can't move through the soil profile very easily. And then we also have conditions where we have coarse sand and gravel right next to our lakes. So in those conditions, I think it's a hyperpermeable kind of scenario, and we should be treating a little bit to a higher level because that wastewater moves so fast that it's not getting adequate treatment, no residence time in the soil profile. So we have requirements for the oversight of wastewater systems within our counties and our district. And when I started the health department, we had 3 sanitary codes, even though we're the same district. In 2007, we had 2, and in 2017, we're at 1 code, which was a colossal political, many years of my life I'll never get back, but I think it was well worth it. We have one of the strongest codes in the state. We get special recognition through our state accreditation process for our code. And there's a lot of elements in there that really speak to what I was talking about, the advancement of how we look at wastewater in Michigan with respect to advanced treatment systems and operation permits and things that really assure that we're doing the job that we think we're doing. Because once it's in the ground, we don't know. So important elements of a code require that their septic systems are properly sited. So our sanitarians are out with soil augers or backhoes looking at the soil profile. It's very important. Not everyone knows what a sandy loam or a loamy sand, what the difference is, or a clay loam or a silty clay loam. So we send our staff through advanced soil training so they can understand the dynamics of soil properties, but also we look at all kinds of things. We look at isolation from the neighbor's well. We look at isolation from surface water. We look at the building plan. Is there enough room? How many bedrooms does the house have? There's a lot of things that go into how we look at septic systems. So they have to be properly designed, installed correctly. I mean, we have installers. They all have different quality of work. Yes, sir. You got a question?
This is all for new construction,
Correct.
basically.
Yep.
So you have no means to regulate or monitor after?
I'm going to get to management programs, but yes, this is what our sanitary code requires when you walk in the door and apply for a permit, whether it's a new or replacement. That's where we start with it. So they need to be installed correctly, so we do final inspections on every system that we permit. We've failed some. We had to go back. We had to correct some things. Sometimes it had to be completely ripped out, put in a new location. Those things happen. It's not the norm. And then assure proper maintenance. So approval criteria, we're looking at acceptable soils, separation from groundwater. And groundwater, advanced soil identification is one skill. Identifying a groundwater table is another. And we look at what we call seasonal high water table. So it's not where the water is saturated today, it's where that water fluctuates to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the rising water levels we have in our area and the impacts that's having on what we do. But that's very tricky. And it's tricky when we deny a site because we identify that the water table is at this level and we go out on an appeal. People have the right to appeal our decisions, and the appeals board looks and the water level is down here, and we say, yeah, but we know it comes up here. Can't you see these identifying features in a soil? And sometimes it's very difficult for non-professional people that do this every day to see or to understand. So that's part of our challenge with education. So separation from groundwater and isolation from surface water. We have a very conservative isolation from surface water. We have 100 feet. Many areas around the state have 50. I think that's really done a good job in protecting our natural resources and being good stewards. Drinking water wells, we obviously want to keep wastewater away from drinking water wells, even though there's construction requirements for wells that prevent surface contamination. Many times we're out in areas with legacy properties next door that aren't up to the 1994 code and maybe aren't grouted properly or they're shallow. So they're still vulnerable to wastewater contamination. Designs include proper sizing for the soil type. So the way we design systems, if you have a clay, you have a much larger system. Sand is a smaller system. Also looking at where groundwater is and the proposed use. So how many bedrooms is the home? And this becomes challenging when we go through permitting because we'll have an applicant come in that, yeah, it's a 2-bedroom home, but I have an exercise room, an office, a workout room, whatever they label it, the potential if they sell and move on or if their family grows is that those become bedrooms. So we're always kind of struggling with what that really means. And we built some protections in the code with our sizing that help protect against overloading of a system or going beyond the design capacity. But we're always in this method of trying to refine our process so that we're designing the system for the maximum occupancy of that home if it were used that way. And I have seating capacity and other things when we get into commercial systems. We also permit and inspect those. And installation requires final inspection and compliance by the health department. So that's our local code, but then there's state codes that we also administer through the health department. Public health code requires, as an essential public health function, that we manage and oversee wastewater in our districts. We're overseen by Eagle. I mentioned accreditation earlier, so we get accredited every 3 years. They come in, they look at our codes, they look at our permits, they look at how we do final inspections. We get our own inspection, and we've always done very well, which I'm proud of, and it's speaks to the work that we put into our codes, but also the competency and commitment of our staff. Other regulations that we administer are the Michigan criteria for subsurface disposal, and that covers commercial systems up to 10,000 gallons a day. After 6,000 gallons a day, we get in a dual permitting process with the state, but a lot of those are, non-residential uses. So they're restaurants, they're convenience stores, they may be apartment buildings, condominiums. Condominium Act, that deals with high-density development, and they are evaluated and approved under different rules. So they have to have, we work a lot with engineers and surveyors. to make sure that they meet the conditions of the Condominium Act. And these administrative rules were developed by the Department of Environmental Quality, now EGLE. And those are very specific rules to wastewater design and siting and how we do approvals. Land Division Act deals with small lots and the requirements. It's similar to the condominium concept of looking at high density development. So anything under an acre falls under Land Division Act if it was developed after 1997. And we have to look at those differently than we look at a conventional meets and bounds piece of property under state law. And then solid waste regulations. We administer the septic program for the state of Michigan. So we evaluate the trucks, the land sites that they dispose on, storage facilities, and wastewater receiving and treatment facilities. So all those fall under the auspices of the health department, and we inspect those on an annual basis. So why maintain your septic system? Some people, hitting them in the pocketbook is a good reason. You know, it's cheaper to pump your tank on some frequency than to replace your drain field, because you never pumped your tank and now solids, that clear zone is no longer there and all the solids are going out to your field. And that's a really bad day, especially when it's 4th of July and you have a bunch of company over. Protect your property value. Obviously, if you had a failing or just septic in disrepair, your property value has gone down. We'll get into time of transfer programs. Those have become issues. Keep you and your neighbors healthy. I mean, if your septic system is discharging into a little creek that's going out into the lake where your neighbor's kids swim or your grandkids are swimming, and you know, like we talked about, the dangerous pathogens and viruses and things that can happen and that you can be exposed to and have some pretty detrimental effects. You know, you don't want to be responsible for that. And protect the environment. As I said before, you know, there's a high level of nutrients in wastewater that if it impacts surface waters, has an impact on the ecology and can result in fish kills and shellfish if you're in saltwater environments. So, oversight and maintenance. I have some categories here. There's self-initiated, enforcement, mandatory, and maintenance programs. Self-initiated typically is pumping your tank. Most homeowners, if they're really diligent, will pump their tank routinely. A lot of times it's in response to a problem. My toilet isn't flushing. I had an issue last spring. I had an additional tank installed and an additional part of a drain field installed on my property because I expanded my use. Actually, I didn't expand my use. I just increased the number of bedrooms that's required under code. So kind of a self-inflicted problem, but they put an effluent filter in the outlet baffle of my septic tank, which I asked them to do. And when they installed it, the tank was open for a while and a bunch of leaves got in the tank. Well, this spring, my wife said, "Hey, the toilet downstairs isn't flushing right." And I went down there and sure enough, and I plunged and I was really ready to take the toilet off and snake the line and everything. I figured maybe one of my kids had flushed something they shouldn't. And I just looked out the window and I could see that something didn't appear right around that septic tank lid. I opened the lid and the effluent was right up to the top. And I got a garbage bag around my arm. I reached down in there. Sounds gross. It is. Pulled the filter out. All of a sudden it was like the toilet bowl. Everything flowed out into the field. And that effluent filter was plugged with leaves. And if you think of, you know, like a piece of paper, you got a screen, put a piece of paper against it, you're not moving any liquid. So I was lucky it didn't back up into the home or create other problems. But I do this for a living. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? So, and some people never maintain their tank, either till there's a problem. Sometimes they'll accept wastewater slowly because there's only 2 people living in the house. They're not high water users. They sell their house to a new family with a bunch of kids, showers, babies, you know, take a lot of water. And all of a sudden they're in there for a week and it's blowing out of the ground or backing up into the home. So that's self-initiated enforcement. you know, we are required by law to investigate sewage complaints. We do it, I don't want to say routinely, but every year we have a handful of sewage complaints. Typically those are done by neighbors that smell it, see what we're seeing over on the other side of the screen there. Kids are walking through it, dogs are running through it, you know, you can imagine the exposure issues and vector control of bacteria. But we may observe it if we're out doing a well permit on a piece of property and we have to get isolation from all the septic systems. We may discover, oh my gosh, the neighbor's system is failing or the system on site is failing, and we have to enforce our code. Again, complaints from the public, typically neighbors, and referrals from other regulatory agencies. So building department might be on a site, soil erosion, townships may become aware of things and they'll refer it to our agency to deal with. Mandatory maintenance programs, again, we're kind of moving in that direction where we're looking toward ongoing maintenance of septic systems. Those can happen through contracts, agreements, or operation permits. And that's really where our regulations kind of kick in to look at maintenance of some of these more sophisticated systems. And then there's wastewater management programs. I got 15 minutes. Yes, sir.
How do you recommend pumping routine for systems?
Like on what frequency?
Frequency. Residential systems.
The conventional message used to be 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
But it depends on your use.
Sure.
So, and everybody uses their system differently. I tell people the one variable we can't control out of all this is what the homeowner does.
Right.
So my suggestion is if you haven't had your tank pumped, get it pumped. But don't just get it pumped and pay him, have him evaluate, you know, how much, because they have methods to look at how much sludge and scum and when the last time your tank was pumped and say, you know what, for your situation it might be 9 years.
Yep.
You know, a family that has lots of parties or runs an in-home daycare, it might be every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to put a firm
Right.
number on it, but 3 to 5 is a general rule of thumb.
Scott, can I add something there?
Sure.
Michigan State University Extension has a Septics website, and they have a table here to help guide you, and it shows like the how many gallons your septic can handle and how many people are living in your home. And so for myself, as an example, I'm one person in a 1,000-gallon tank. The number of they suggest I pump every 12 years. Okay,
Yep.
so that's just a guideline. Like Scott
Yep.
said, you know, not everybody, just because it's that many people, that doesn't mean you're not having big parties or whatever. You know?
Right.
So,
Right.
but that anyway, they have a great site, and that's a good guideline.
And that actually is in our septic question
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have some available
I
today.
do. I have
Okay.
some. I can, if anybody wants one.
So, it's a perfect segue to this slide, because in looking at management programs, Granetta and I worked long hours and collected a lot of information, mostly Granetta. I'll give her all the credit. Looking at different management programs, not just in Michigan, but nationwide, and really trying to understand what they included, what experiences people have had who have programs in place and have been doing it for years. So what the pros and the cons, you know, what's working, what doesn't work, what can be improved upon. But time of transfer, I was telling a gentleman here that in 2007 when we passed, not the current code, but the one before, we actually tried to get a regional point of sale program in place under our code and met with a lot of resistance. You know, property sales are very tenuous, they're emotional processes. I think some of it had to do with not wanting to interrupt that process with a point of sale program. At that time, there weren't a lot of point of sale programs around. So it's kind of the unknown, you know, what does this mean? Once it's in an ordinance or a regulation, it's required. So we kind of backed away from that a little bit and tried to promote townships to pass ordinances so we can kind of build on experience. But typically, time of transfer, point of sale happens when the property is being sold, can be inspected. They're looking at the wastewater system and or water supply. And those can be done by the local health department or a certified inspection company. They're enforced by either the health department, the township, or the county. Usually there are exemptions, foreclosures, divorce, husband to wife transfers, family transfers. Usually there's a host of exemptions to the requirement. But the biggest thing that people don't like is not all properties get inspected, only the ones that get sold. So you're not hitting all of the properties. Currently we have, this is Milton Township on the right. Milton Township has a time of transfer program. I think we're going on 9 years now. It's been a very successful program. We've enhanced it every year. We've done something a little different. We report out to the township annually about the inspections we've done and what the results have been. We work real closely with that township. It's been a great experience. I can't say that for everybody. The Village of Elk Rapids passed a time of transfer program. Basically just took Milton's and took out Milton Township and put in Elk Rapids Village. So it's the same ordinance essentially. They only have about 100 properties in the village that this applies to. Last year, the end of last year, they contacted me and we're looking at a mandatory inspection program instead of the time of transfer. So we'd be looking at every property, those 100 or so properties, on some frequency. I think it was 5 years, what they were looking at. Mandatory pumping. So in this management program, all systems would be pumped on a frequency. Most that I have seen have been around 5 years. One of the things I don't like is you're only pumping the tank. You're not really evaluating the system. You're just evacuating the tank. There is information that can be gotten from pumping out your tank. Sometimes the baffles fall off, especially in older septic tanks. So you aren't sucking from the clear zone. That can be identified. Sometimes there's flow back when they pump. I've heard of people pumping their tank twice. I go, how do you pump your tank twice? Well, it filled back up. Well, clearly there's something going on in the drain field. So there's a lot that can be gathered from that. Like I said earlier, they can measure the scum and sludge and tell you what frequency you should be on. Because if you aren't on the right frequency, it's a biological process. And it takes time to develop and get right in that sweet zone where it's treating the waste effectively. So if you pump too frequently, you're not building that biology necessary for treatment. If you let it go too long, you've got the other problems we've talked about. When I looked at our district, if we were to implement something like that across our 4 counties, we do not have enough pumpers, holding tanks, receiving facilities, or land application sites to even accommodate a program like that. And that's something not everyone thinks about. When you think about a program, you're not thinking about those consequences. So it really, any management program really has to have a very thoughtful approach before someone implements something that can't be enforced. Mandatory inspection, that'd be, again, all properties are inspected on some regular frequency. This was a proposal under the latest version of the statewide sanitary code. And again, when we looked at our district, we'd have to have an army of sanitarians to even fulfill what they were asking us to do. But I do like that the entire system is evaluated. Yes, sir.
I'll wait till you get done with that one. I want to go back up to number 1.
Okay. Having the entire system evaluated, I think is critical to understanding how that system works. We've gone out on systems that were permitted many years ago, and we have a struggle even trying to find it. Our final inspection used to be a signature that, yep, we inspected, it was fine. The sanitarian, that system may have been moved, and there was no documentation. This is one thing that accreditation has done for us, is it's enhanced our documentation, not only of the system when we put it in, or when we design it, but the installation. We have, they're almost like mini engineered plans now, so that when we go back, we know exactly where that is. But these legacy systems, it's not the case. evaluation on a prescribed frequency, and again, manpower to conduct all the inspections. Before I get to your question, I just want to talk about that graphic for a minute. This was produced by the Watershed Council here. They had an intern that was doing GIS work. And Grenetta and I, through the Septic question program, we're talking about Milton Township, talking about our time and transfer program that was local. And I said, well, it'd be really interesting to look at all the properties in Milton Township and to look at all the properties that the health department's been involved with. So when we looked at that, there were about 3,000 parcels within Milton Township. The orange ones are the ones that we have set foot on as a health department, whether that's a well permit, a septic permit, an existing system evaluation, a land evaluation. Even at that time, with all the work we were doing for time of transfer, we had only been on a third of the properties ever in one township. Now I'm thinking about 4 counties worth of properties and how few that represents that we've even been involved with. So, I mean, you can look at land uses, so some of them may be farms, some of them may be other uses, but I have a feeling, and I believe, that there's a lot of properties out there that have systems before our code, systems where people have done whatever they felt necessary. When I worked in mid-Michigan, this is kind of my downstate experience, it was all rural farming, and people wouldn't go to the health department for permits. They'd hook into the field tile for their fields. So we had illicit discharges a lot. I don't see that up here, but I think there have been a lot of systems gone in without our involvement. Yes, sir.
Well, my concern is, if up in that top paragraph, it's the first bullet and the last bullet. Whose responsibility is it to ask for the inspection, and who do you ask to give the inspection? And if you get the inspection, do you get some kind of a document back that says you've been inspected?
All good questions. We have an intergovernmental agreement with Milton Township, so it's their ordinance. They take care of the enforcement of their ordinance. From our perspective, we get an application across the counter for a mortgage evaluation, and we go out and do the work and provide a report. So if there's a property that's sold that did not get an evaluation, the township enforces that because they have the tax rolls. It's their ordinance. But through our intergovernmental agreement, I mean, we will enforce things that violate the sanitary code. If we go out there and there's a failed system and those sorts of things, we have obligations under our code to do that. But the ordinance is enforced by the township.
Scott, related to that, in townships that don't have an ordinance, can you, as a buyer, you can request?
Yes, we offer that service throughout our district. Yep.
What's the charge for that service, for the inspection by the county?
I think it's around $290, $300, something like that. And we do water supply also, so we collect water samples, we look at the construction of the well, and then we look at the wastewater system. And there's a full report that we get, and we have required actions if there were things that didn't meet code that were issues from an enforcement standpoint. We have recommendations to enhance the life of that system or the safety, like unsecure riser lids and things like that. So we have different iterations of things that are on that report that are helpful to the homeowner.
So is an inspection determining whether or not the system meets today's codes, or is it just, does it work?
Substantial compliance with our code. So if we feel there's a public or environmental health threat, then we have to do enforcement. And enforcement usually is you need to come and make application for a permit within 5 days, and we're not putting handcuffs on people. So we're trying to work with them to get that system up to code. If it's not 100 feet from a lake, because we understand that in the past, maybe our requirement was 50 back in the late 60s. We may identify that, but if the system's functioning fine, we'll note that and we'll look to see if there is land available on their site that would meet code. Otherwise, it may be a restriction on future uses of the property. Like we don't allow people to rebuild or add bedrooms if they have a non-conforming system. think you had a question.
I'm a realtor. We get routinely requests that the home be inspected
Mm-hmm.
by certified licensed inspectors.
Yep.
But those inspectors often offer this septic tank inspection. But they're not necessarily certified by you, if I'm
No.
understanding you correctly?
No.
And they're not reporting them to you?
No. There
So
are
they're
certification.
charging usually an extra $250 to $300 for that inspection, but it actually isn't an approved septic inspection by you.
Not by us. And that, when we went through with Milton and entered into our intergovernmental agreement, that was one of the issues, is they wanted us to do that inspection because we are the ones who are familiar with the regulations and the requirements, and can really speak to how it relates to our code, because there were some private inspectors in that area, but they made that decision at the time they passed the ordinance that we would be the people doing that inspection. Now, they did have the caveat that if we developed a certification program and certified inspectors and developed something, that then that intergovernmental agreement could be amended. We just haven't at this point.
So I'm not in Milton,
Mm-hmm.
or I will sell there, but generally
Yep.
speaking, I'm more in the Emmett, Charlevoix, all the other ones you mentioned. So our inspectors aren't certified or reported to you, so we're paying for septic inspections, which are really just their opinion. Am I? But
Yeah, I think
none
that's...
of them have really come for training.
I mean, they're probably getting pump statements and telling you the volume of the septic tank and looking at the drain field, making sure it's not failed. But with respect to how that relates to the code, I don't know how they can speak to that or not. I mean,
Okay, because you're not offering them a certification or training, that they will
Correct.
take a class from you.
not currently. And we don't do a whole lot of outside of this area. We don't do a whole lot. We haven't historically, since like the mid-90s, done a lot of mortgage evaluations. It used to be more of a requirement by the lending agency,
Well, I'm not even thinking about lenders, just as a homeowner,
right?
we recommend them so that they know what the system's at,
Yeah.
what's going on.
I would suggest they come to us just because of the issues we talked about. We're just not set up right now to run a certification program. I've talked to other health departments that do, and it's a labor. I mean, it's a lot of tracking and keeping up with people, and
How long will it take
they've
you to
had
get up?
enforcement issues with some of their inspectors because they want to provide a good report so they get the next job. So I'm exploring that,
How long
but
will it take you to come out and do an inspection?
how long? Our application under code, we have 15 days to respond, but depends on the time of year. I mean, summer, we're super busy, and that's probably when you're super busy.
Well, a lot of ours say that the inspection has to be in a 7 to 10 day period,
Okay.
and so you guys. wouldn't
Typically,
meet
we
at
can
all.
make that. We can't guarantee that, but,
Okay.
you could call the inspector and say, hey,
Yeah.
how's your workload right now? Do you have time to do this? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, documentation, how can we prove we got an inspection?
How can we prove?
Yeah.
We provide a report, a 3-page report, including a drawing and recommendations and all of our observations and how it relates to the code. So, yes, sir.
Do those same non-certified inspectors also sell services to replace septic tanks, fields, and otherwise?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't know any of it.
But
I
they
don't know
do have
any
a
of the
conflict of
process.
interest that they could want to chum future business by giving recommendations that things.
I'm not
match
accusing
up
anybody of
don't.
anything, but I think there is that
Yeah.
potential there. So, yes, ma'am.
So maybe I'm gonna jump ahead, but I'm a homeowner. I
Right?
know nothing about septic systems until I bought a house that had a septic system. So I've learned some things the hard way.
Uh-huh.
But what I'm curious about are the ads that you see on television and other places about all of these materials, things that you should be pouring down your drain or putting into your septic system.
Don't put anything in there that isn't,
Okay, that's.
Being
if
flushed
it's-
or
if
down
it's
the drain
not
or-
broken, and
Yep.
the tank is getting emptied and the people that are coming to empty it out say, this looks fine, you don't need to do it for another 5 years.
Yeah.
That's what I should
a
trust.
lot of those products are good for your septic tank because you don't have to pump as often, but what they do is they're a dispersant. So when I talked about suspended solids and settling, it prevents that from happening. So you get more suspended material going out.
So
And a
I-
drain field is what you want to
I
protect.
should not be putting
No.
anything additional?
Even the biological degradable wipes and those things, no. I mean, those things take a long time to degrade. Yes, sir.
Are you still gonna talk about rising water levels?
I am.
Okay.
I'm getting there. Yes.
I have a system question for, I'm thinking about small lots on inland lakes.
Yep.
That there is no space to make improvements, no space to do new septic systems, and these cottages were built in the
30s, 40s, yeah.
20s, 30s.
Yep. We struggle with those.
And there's no land, there's nothing. I thought I read somewhere a few years ago that there's actually a septic system that is a freestanding system outside of the ground. There's no such thing as that?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
I mean, there's
Okay.
new stuff all the time, but
Okay.
typically what we would do if it were not a conforming site, there wasn't room to do anything, there was no off-site location, is a holding tank. And that's our worst case scenario.
So a holding
Gets
tank
pumped out.
gets,
Yeah, we don't
maybe
even
that's
reference
what
it in the
I'm
code.
thinking of. It's a freestanding tank that gets pumped on a regular basis?
That's what that would be, yeah.
On
But typically
the
they're
property.
below ground. They're not
Oh, below ground?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. So there is a solution for those people who are in those
There
horrible
is, but
situations?
those cabins, we don't allow them to be reconstructed or rebuilt or bedrooms added. It's like, you got what you got, and this is the only solution we have for you, unfortunately. It's, so emerging issues. I'm gonna try to speed up because we're after 1. But operation permit programs, I guess that would be under management, apologize. But many health departments are regulating through their codes, so we provided an operation permit program for holding tanks, for off-site systems, and for advanced treatment systems. And they all have reporting requirements to us. It's a renewable permit, either on a 1 or a 5-year cycle. We track those. We need deliverables, like if it's a holding tank, we need pump statements. If it's an advanced treatment system, we need the performance data. If it's an off-site, we will actually go out and do those evaluations. So we walk the whole system, look for obvious signs of failure, make sure it's operating the way it was intended, and then we reissue the permit. Performance standards are related to the advanced treatment systems. Earlier I talked about BOD and TSS and TIN, those indicators of wastewater strength. Those are the things that we require from the ATS operator or maintenance provider. And if they fall within our performance standards, then they get approved. If they don't, then they may have to augment that system. If it's really bad and they can't correct it, they may end up pumping and hauling for a while till we can get that corrected. One of the things we struggle with, I think about technologies like Dan. Dan, you're not around forever. Is how that knowledge and how we continue to have maintenance providers for systems we have out there today. If a company goes under for some reason, are there going to be people that know that system and are able to maintain it? So there's a risk there. Managing and tracking renewals, I do all of them for the district. It's a royal pain. People don't call us and say, hey, we just sold the property, here's the new owner. We go to renew a permit and send a letter to a homeowner, and they're like, I don't even own the property, I don't know why you're calling me. So we work a lot with equalization to figure out who the new owner is and contact them. And even though we require deed restrictions that identify that this property has an advanced treatment system that requires regular maintenance, I remember signing my mortgage 1,000 times. I didn't read through all that stuff, probably should have. People sometimes are unaware that they need a maintenance provider and have this obligation to have renewals and inspections, and so it's an education process at that time. One of the things we're seeing a lot of that's disturbing me greatly are seasonal rentals. If you look online, go to VROB, you'd be shocked how many seasonal rentals are in our area. There's a significant financial motivation to rent out properties, especially in our area, because it's gorgeous and beautiful and fun. What we're seeing is that a couple things. They're frightening. One is it's reducing our housing market. Those homes would have been sold in the past, potentially. Now they're being taken up by rentals, and we already have a little bit of a housing crisis in northern Michigan for people. But what really bothers me is this one right here, is that, like, I recently had an issue with a 3-bedroom home that was marketed as a 7-bedroom home with up to 22 people. That system was designed as a 3-bedroom home. We assume 2 people per bedroom. That's 6 people, and they're renting it out to 22 people. That system was blying all over the ground because it was off-site with no easement, done in the 70s. Thankfully, they had run sewer in front of this home, so they had an option. It was a $22,000 option, but it was an option. So I looked, and I go, wow, that's a lot of money out of the blue. I looked at what they were renting it for, and the length of time that they were renting it for. So from mid-August to September, end of September, at their occupancy level, they were going to make $51,000.
These are short-term rental agreements you're talking
Short-term.
about, yeah.
So this financial motivation is driving an environmental and public health concern. And that, I don't know how to get a handle on that. I know there's some townships that have passed some ordinances requiring licensure of short-term rentals. And they require inspection by the health department and maximum occupancy, which I think can help prevent this. But it's like the barn door is open now. I mean, I think we're going to be doing a lot of replacement systems in the future. And then here's the other big one, and Jen and the Watershed could probably speak more to it, is rising water levels. So we're running into issues where we had previous approvals that no longer comply with the code. As I said before, determining water table is a very difficult in some situations, depending on the soil type. So we've approved properties through a land evaluation. Now we go back, somebody applies for a permit, we're looking at standing water on the ground. So that's an issue. Existing systems that are in the ground may be non-conforming now. So when we think about a point of sale program where they had a permit through the health department, a final inspection, we go back out there, now the separation of groundwater is not what the code requires. And we have to deal with those. So, or surface water isolation, you know, if you have a shallow shoreline, a few inches in water table brings it inshore quite a bit.
Yeah.
Erosion undermining systems, there's a picture right there. We had one very similar to this picture on Beaver Island, where the bluff was just eroded away and the wastewater system ended up in Lake Michigan. And these are very real, along with structures. And legacy systems that were before codes, the cabin you're talking about, are in areas that are very vulnerable. And I'm sure a lot of them are likely polluting our lakes. And we have no way to really know for sure. These are just a few pictures we've taken recently. This one, it's not a wastewater system, that's a well pit. That is a pressure tank here that's floating on its side because pressure tanks are half full of air, so it becomes a bobber. And we've run into this on some of our mortgage evaluations, and it's scary because that's live electricity in there that will kill you. So those are issues, not to mention the potential, especially that's an old 2-inch well, probably wasn't grouted. So that surface water that's filling the pit could be going down in the side of the casing, and it could be going into their drinking water. This is someone's solution to rising water levels. I don't know if that was permitted by DEQ or anybody. I'm not here to judge. There's a hose here. I'm sure they have a sump pump that's pumping water out of their home. Here, someone used sandbags. That's the cover of a that's a drain field where that flag is. That stake is where the septic tank is.
Oh my God.
That's over in Gaylord. That's not even on the Great Lakes. So we're seeing this not only on the Great Lakes, but on our inland lakes. So, should I wrap it up? It's my last slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're doing
Statewide code. There's been a push for a statewide code. I was involved in a statewide work group. I have some very bad feelings about statewide code. A lot of people are very supportive of statewide code. I think it solves some problems in our area. I think our codes are as strong as anything in the state. My concern is that it would deteriorate what we have here. because they try to find a universal compromise for the state. The last time I heard, they were talking about 2 foot of separation between the drain field and water table, which scares the out of me. There was a serious lack of consensus among health departments. In fact, we weren't even engaged in the process till way after the draft was written, which I think is very insulting. There's nobody that has looked at, designed, installed more systems in our area than me and my staff, and to not be involved in a political process to pass a code and not get our input, I was not very pleased about that. Logistical concerns, sort of going back to when I talked about management systems, is that, a code can be developed and not be able to be administered by the local health department, with manpower in particular. When they were talking about inspecting all systems, I don't have enough people to do that. I couldn't hire enough. Concerned that it was more of a political process than a scientific process. Deterioration of existing standards that gets to our code, and many in our area, actually. Lack of funding. There was no funding mechanism, so all that cost would be put on the client or the citizen. Rather than being properly funded, we'd have to rely on fees and collections. No provisions for low-income loans for repairs. They had it in there and then they took it out. And when they look at charging the health department to inspect every system, we're going to find problems. And Harbor Springs, Petoskey, a little more affluent than Mansalona. But if you have a failed system, it needs to be replaced all the same. And without provisions for some loan process, I don't want to be kicking people out of their houses. I don't want to be condemning homes, and that's a fear that we had with the way it was being proposed, is what would happen to our agency. Rather than being an agency, we are regulators, but permitting and public education, we'd be an enforcement agency, and that's not what I got in public health for. Eagle staff didn't have enough staff to provide support for what was being proposed. And there are several states, I don't know about states, but several areas and states where the statewide code is not working. So I've heard only state in the nation without a statewide code. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think there are things that we can do on a statewide level that would kind of gain some consistency. My perception is that we should start slow, take a smaller bite of the apple. We can't even agree statewide what the definition of a failure is. Right. Why would we be trying to implement all these new programs without having that consistency?
And I just want to clarify here that Scott's talking about a proposal, a specific proposal that was being seriously discussed that had all of these weaknesses and yes, several more. But there are states in the nation that have a statewide minimum standard that allows local governments to do better as long as they meet those minimum standards. And what Scott's talking about, our area is much more conservative, with things like 100-foot separation instead of 50 feet, so his points are very well taken. But there are states in the nation that do have statewide codes, and they have statewide funding mechanisms, and I have put those things together and shared that with the legislature, and I'm willing to share it in the future with anybody, because there are solutions out there, and it may be that some are considering moving away, but there are some that are very successful. And if Michigan does move in that direction, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But we do have to deal with local and state political attitudes, okay? The politics of this jumps in immediately. So, anyway, I just want to mention that there are solutions out there and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel to get to something good. But all those issues like the land application, the limitations on where to land apply and what the septic haulers do, and the local staff, it really does require a slow, thoughtful approach.
And I appreciate that, Renetta. And I'm not opposed ever to having a statewide code. It does need to be a thoughtful process, and it needs to be inclusive of the professionals that are working in the industry right now. And that's the one thing that really didn't happen and could have prevented a lot of those deficiencies. Yes?
So if we're not residents of Northwest, and like residents in Sheboygan, is there something comparable on the Northeast Michigan side?
Yep, they have their own sanitary code. I don't think it's quite as strong as ours, but I think Northern Michigan as a whole is better than a lot of the downstate.
The county and the township to find out what it is. What's your...
They're a District 2, they're a 4-county district, so they have an office in every one of the counties. Yes, ma'am?
Is there a downside to having you come out? So we have, like, we bought a house that was like in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And then the, half the family kept the lot next door. And that's where our septic system sits, our drain field.
Is that on your neighbor's property?
It is now.
Okay.
So now they're doing things to make it so that they can build on the property. But that's where our drainage field is. Is there a downside to having somebody come out, and whether it's for that purpose, to look at these older systems? It's probably not 100 feet from the water, it's probably 50. You know, is there like a negative that would keep you?
Normal, our definition of failure, as long as the system isn't backing up in the house, isn't discharging out of the ground or into surface waters, you know, there is some grandfatherable scenarios. We try to be very conscious of the situation. I mean, if we feel there's a public health threat or environmental threat, then we have to do what we have to do.
Yeah.
But we may come out and identify, hey, it's not sized for the number of bedrooms you have. But until the point where you make a change, add a bedroom, decide to do a reconstruction project, we'll probably allow that system to continue. We'll probably want you to do a pump out, get a pump statement, some other things. But really, unless there's something going on, there's probably no detriment to having us come out.
Okay.
The one thing that may be a detriment in that circumstance is if you don't have an easement, your neighbor says, I'm building out my property, you're gonna have to find somewhere else to go. So that could be a problem. So that is all I have. I did pass out a couple of things.
Yeah.
One is a homeowner septic care guide, so it kind of describes what a drain field is, has some do's and don'ts. And this is a folder you can keep to document things that you do with your drain field. If you want to get your permit from the health department, you can call us, get your wastewater permit and keep it in this folder for your use. And that's all I have for you.
Scott, just a quick one. I understand your concerns at the statewide level. How about going lower at a county? The township level is a real hodgepodge, I think. But would the county be better, or
for
the inspections?
Like an ordinance?
Yeah, the ordinance.
If you can get a county to pass an ordinance like that, yeah. No, I think Benzie County has a county ordinance that they've had for 20-some years, and it's very
I was just
successful.
thinking consistency, that's all, but I can understand it statewide.
Well, I'm encouraged that, like, the Milton Township model was used in Elm Rapids, because it's a working model, and there's some, you know, track record.
Right,
So.
right, yeah, I know.